The scene begins with Joe, a middle manager in a corporate setting, finding himself in a mysterious, prison-like structure with no recollection of how he got there. He frantically searches for his phone but can't find it. As he looks around, he sees high walls, a heavy metal door, and a massive stone mill. Confused and disoriented, Joe starts yelling for help, which prompts a neighboring cellmate to tell him to quiet down. Joe approaches a small air vent and asks the man to help him understand his situation. The man informs Joe that he was drugged and will experience depression for a few days as a side effect. He advises Joe to rest, as the following day will be challenging. A guard then delivers basic food and water through a door slot, and Joe rushes over, pleading with the guard to release him, explaining that he has a pregnant wife who needs his care. However, the guard ignores his pleas and abruptly closes the slot, injuring Joe's hand. Joe then bandages his hand with his tie and eats the provided food, trying to make sense of his new reality. Later in the night, a glow emerges on the wall, and an AI voice greets Joe to a program known as Advanced Career Training. Completely confused by the ongoing situation, Joe once again turns to his fellow inmate for further clarification. This time, the man explains that this prison-like environment is a part of Mallard, the company where Joe is employed. According to the man, many employees, including Joe, have been sent to this place due to their declining performance at work. In the early morning, Joe is given another round of food, along with instructions from the guard to dispose of waste through a toilet opening. Some time later, Joe makes a shocking discovery when he observes something buried in the ground, a human skull. Worried, he hurriedly approaches the vent and inquires about any deaths that have occurred in this place. The inmate then confirms that indeed, many employees have died while working here. Joe wonders how any company could function in such a manner. In response, the man explains that they all signed a contract before joining Mallard, wherein they willingly agreed to all of this. They never spoke up because nobody has the time to read all the terms and conditions mentioned in the contract. Shortly after, the AI voice addresses Joe, providing him with a briefing about his new job. The voice states that Joe will be working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and his responsibilities will involve pushing the stone mill. Joe's daily objective is to accomplish 50 revolutions, or else he'll face consequences. The employee with the lowest point total will be let go, regardless of whether they meet their quota. Joe vainly attempts to persuade the AI voice to permit him to leave, but his cellmate informs him that it's futile, as the business will keep them as long as they need. Without any other option, Joe begins his physically demanding job. Getting the revolutions isn't easy, as it takes a lot of power. Nonetheless, Joe puts in his best effort and finishes 100 revolutions by the end of the day. After a tired sleep, he is awakened by the anguished cries of a fellow worker who is going to be executed. The next morning, while enjoying his breakfast and chatting with the adjacent cellmate, Joe questions the purpose of the quota because staff members are fired even when they achieve their goal. The neighbor responds by stating that for Mallard, good enough is not sufficient. During their discussion, the neighbor discovers that Joe completed 100 revolutions the day before and advises him not to push himself too hard, or else Mallard will raise his expectations. Joe, on the other hand, is convinced that putting in a lot of effort will be his ticket to freedom and a reunion with his pregnant wife. Later, as he works, Joe reflects on the day he gave his wife, Kate, their brand new home. Joe's wife was concerned about the expensive gift his company had given him, but he managed to reassure her. The next day, Kate reminded him of his doctor's appointment and asked him to take a day off, but Joe hesitated, causing her distress. She was upset with his prioritization of work over family. When the alarm went off, Joe snapped back to reality and realized he had made 150 revolutions. After his shift, a guard instructed him to undress and enter a dimly lit area, where he was doused with water. To his relief, it was just a bath. Joe continued to work hard in the sweltering heat, drinking more water and eventually running out. Desperate, he tried to signal the guard for more water, but his neighbor informed him that they only provided enough food and water to keep them alive. The neighbor suggested he urinate in bottles, filter them using his shoe insoles, and hide them behind a pillar for future use. However, Joe was disgusted by the idea and refused. Despite his exhaustion, he continued to work, only thinking of Kate. He describes how she expressed concern about the medical expenses and how he reassured her to put in more effort. As the day ends, exhaustion takes over him, and the AI voice praises him for his impressive accomplishment of 370 revolutions. While taking a break, Joe notices the name Alex carved under the wooden handle and asks his neighbor about it. The neighbor explains that Alex is the only person who managed to escape from this place. At that moment, Mallard rewards Joe with a pen engraved with his name for his work that day. However, since the pen is useless to him, he becomes furious and has an outburst. The next day, when work begins, Joe realizes that his daily target has been raised to 370 revolutions. He argues that he cannot meet this goal, pointing to his injured hands as evidence. Nevertheless, the AI voice insists that humans are more capable than they believe. Following this, Joe starts working, only to find out that he doesn't receive a point for completing a revolution. Instead, his clock is marked with an X. When he asks, the neighbor clarifies that Joe has been penalized and now needs to complete 2 revolutions to earn a point, making his new target 740. With no other option, Joe begins his toil. He pushes himself to his limits, but eventually exhaustion takes over and he gives up. By the end of the day, the AI voice notifies him that he has not met his quota and suggests that he may need a new source of motivation. Then, Kate's profile appears on the screen, and the AI voice threatens to bring her here too. This terrifies Joe, so he quickly promises to meet his target the next day. The AI gives him an opportunity to prove his dedication. The following day, Joe covers the mill handle with his coat to lessen the strain on his injured hand. He exerts all his strength to achieve the required number of revolutions. At one point, his tiredness leads to hallucinations, where he sees a mocking version of himself making fun of his belief in Mallard. However, Joe manages to disregard these distractions and persists in his work, meeting the quota just moments before 10 o'clock. The penalty is finally removed from his record and Joe falls asleep beside the mill. In the early morning hours, he is awakened by the AI voice, which presents him with a brief video of his wife at the hospital with their newborn child. Overwhelmed with emotions, Joe sheds tears as he realizes that he has become a father, even though he couldn't be there. Afterwards, he approaches the ventilation shaft and inquires the neighbor about how Alex managed to escape from this dreadful place. Initially, the neighbor is unsure, but upon learning about Joe's newborn child, he connects it to his own life story and agrees to assist him. He instructs Joe to investigate the area behind a pillar where the surveillance camera cannot see. Following these directions, Joe examines the wall and uncovers a circular section. Recognizing its vulnerability, he retrieves his engraved pen and commences digging into the wall. Days go by, and Joe dedicates his spare time to enlarging the hole. Eventually, he creates a passageway large enough for him to crawl through. Venturing inside, he finds himself in a dimly lit space. Joe scans his surroundings, hoping to find an exit, but his efforts prove fruitless as the guard discovers him and renders him helpless. Upon regaining consciousness, Joe realizes that the hole has been filled once again. As punishment, his workload is increased to 1,000 revolutions, while the neighbor has his leg amputated. Feeling powerless, Joe apologizes to his neighbor, but the neighbor is in so much agony that he can no longer work. Joe wonders if there is anything he can do, but the neighbor reveals that the entire facility is controlled by algorithms and reasoning with artificial intelligence is impossible. Furthermore, he confesses that he was the one who developed the algorithm during his time in the IT department. After hearing this, Joe has an epiphany. If they all cease working and earn no points, it will result in a tie and the algorithm will not be able to punish anyone. Motivated by this concept, Joe endeavors to create a union with his fellow prisoners and persuade them not to work. As the working hour commences, nobody works as they all seem to be convinced by Joe. However, when the end of the work time approaches, the AI voice declares that employees with 0 points will be fired. Gripped with fear of death, the cellmates resume working, thwarting Joe's plan. In desperation, Joe is advised by his neighbor to rotate the mill without concern for him. With no other option, Joe manages to complete a revolution, earning him a point just before time runs out. However, Joe feels immense guilt for his neighbor, who didn't earn any points due to an injury. That night, the neighbor, aware of his impending demise, confesses that he is actually Alex. Similar to Joe, Alex attempted to escape through the tunnel but was apprehended by the guard and placed in a separate cell. He chose not to disclose this information to Joe, hoping that a second escape attempt would have a different outcome. After a brief conversation, they bid each other farewell. As Joe settles down to sleep, he is tormented by the anguished cries of Alex before he is eliminated. The following day, the AI presents Joe with another video, featuring his wife and their now walking child. Upon realizing the significant amount of time he has wasted in this prison-like environment, he becomes furious and directs his anger towards the company. Despite his 10 years of devoted service, he berates Mallard for taking away everything he had. Regrettably, the artificial intelligence deems his behavior unacceptable and issues an immediate execution order. Subsequently, a group of Mallard employees enters the room, accompanied by a guard. While preparing a lethal injection, the guard proceeds to insult Joe's wife and son, which ignites a violent rage within Joe. In response, he attacks the guard relentlessly, delivering powerful punches. At this point, the AI declares that the guard has failed in his duties and offers Joe a promotion to the next level if he successfully executes the guard. Upon hearing this, Joe pauses and vehemently declares that he is not a monster. He takes a stand, refusing to allow the company to transform him into one. Thus, he quits. Suddenly, Joe awakens and finds himself back in his office, completely shocked. It turns out that he was experiencing an advanced virtual simulation, where employees are connected to a machine through head-mounted devices. Shortly after, someone from the HR department who looks similar to the guard comes up to Joe and informs him that although he thought months had passed, it has actually only been an hour in real time. This means that Joe's son has not been born yet and everything remains the same. The person goes on to reveal that Joe's inability to get a promotion was not because he lacked the skills, but because he had not been given a sufficient challenge to improve. In the virtual world, they challenged him and his performance surpassed their expectations. As a result, they have decided to promote Joe to the next level. Afterward, the HR representative leads Joe to his new office, introduces him to his new goals and expectations for productivity. Joe is also required to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which prohibits him from sharing any details about his experience with anyone. Once the person leaves, Joe calls his wife and becomes emotional upon hearing her voice. He expresses his love for her and their unborn child before ending the call. The movie concludes with Joe making a promise to destroy the entire Mallard company. Please like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.